Welcome back, petrol heads. It's time for another episode of F1 Brake Check. The silly season has already started before the teams have even turned a wheel. We'll talk about the early signings and the repercussions it will have on the driver market. We'll also discuss other news. Corey will once again have a trivia question for our Stump the Pundit segment, and we'll be talking about the 10 most beautiful cars in the history of F1. So settle in and get ready to drool over some truly exceptional cars. This is F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Breen.
On with our news. Before we jump into the driver market, let's start with the other news that came out earlier this week that the FIA and the Formula One constructors have denied Andretti and Cadillac their entrance to F1 for 2026, but they've left the door open for 2028. What's your thoughts?
The thing that, and I'm not a huge Andretti fan, or I don't dislike him, I don't like him, neither one. I'm right there in the middle. I don't have any allegiances one way or another. But the rationale that the FIA gave for denying Andretti was complete and utter crap. They said, we're not going to allow you because we don't think you're going to be competitive. Have they not known who Haas is? You know? I know there's a couple other reasons why, but that was one of the glaring aspects of why they said no to them, is because they didn't believe that they could provide a competitive enough car. Haas has been one of those teams that have consistently been at the bottom of the rankings. I don't see how you can approve and keep Haas in and deny Andretti on those bases. Now, I understand they have other rationales why they didn't, but on that one doesn't make sense to me. And it doesn't honestly sit very well with me either. What are your thoughts?
Okay, well, at first glance, yes, I kind of thought it was BS too, but the more I dug into it over the last couple of days, the more I've come to understand their rationale. Originally, Andretti was pushing to try to be on the grid next year. And I agree that even though they have 100 plus people working on the technical team trying to design a car, for them to come up with a car for 1 year for 2025, come up with a completely brand new car for the new regulations in 2026. Yeah. I understand why they denied them for that reason, because you're right. There's no way that they were going to be able to produce a competitive car in a year's time to simply have to then turn around and produce another competitive car for 2026 going onward. The other rationale that they had, I can see the rationale behind, which was the fact that Cadillac has said that even if they are accepted, they're not going to have a power unit ready until 2028, which means that even if Andretti waited one more year and came in at 2026, they would still have to have a 2-year stopgap for the power unit until Cadillac came online.
Which is fine.
So, and apparently they had a handshake agreement with Renault to supply power units. I've come to understand the FIA's and Formula One's rationale a little more. I still don't totally agree with it. Now, denying them for 2026, that does seem a little harsh simply because they would have had to have used Renault customer engines instead of Cadillac. I can see that. But the fact that they've left the door open for 2028, I think it shows a good sign. Cadillac has said that the only way they're going to come into the sport is with Andretti. So if they deny Andretti, they're basically leaving GM out. And GM is just too big of a global player. They're not going to keep Cadillac out.
So I wonder what our listeners have to say about Andretti and Cadillac getting denied.
So leave us a comment. Tell us what you think. Moving on from Andretti, we have to talk about AlphaTauri's stupid new name. So as we talked about last week, AlphaTauri, or Racing Bulls, as they're now registered with the FIA, this old B-carb thing, for one thing, I can almost guarantee you Crofty and the rest of the Sky Sports team and a lot of the other broadcasters are not going to call them that. They're not going to call them V-carb. They're not going to use the full name. They're just going to call them Racing Bulls. Now we got to move on to the silly season, which has already begun before the first wheel is even turned in testing, before the first car is even revealed. The silly season has already begun. We have to talk about this first story because it definitely dovetails into the second story. So earlier this week, Charles Leclerc signed a contract extension with Ferrari that will keep him there until foreseeable future. It was expected. The team really is at this point has really been built around Leclerc, and the team has for some time has seen Leclerc as their future. So not really surprising. His signing and another one that we'll talk about here in just a minute has kind of set the rest of the driver market already into motion with that signing. And then with today's surprise news. So we're recording this on Thursday, February the 1st. And this morning we got the surprise news that Lewis Hamilton, after only 5 months after signing his 2-year contract extension with Mercedes, has exercised his exit clause and is signed to drive for Ferrari in 2025 as Charles Leclerc's teammate. Go.
We talked about this on a previous podcast, and you and I both said what a stupid move that would be for him. He shouldn't do it. It's going to be career killing for him. I was talking to a friend of mine about this earlier, that Ferrari is where the greats go to die. And if you think about it, Vettel went there, his career just exploded. Kimi Raikkonen went there. I mean, the list goes on. They go to there to die. And now we have Lewis Hamilton. Maybe there's something there in the car that Lewis Hamilton sees that obviously we're not privy to, that he's like, there's no way I'm going to win an 8th championship, because let's be honest, that's what he's after. He wants that 8th one. Maybe he sees that ability in Ferrari. I don't see Ferrari being that much of a contender. Maybe I'm wrong in 2025. Maybe they will have a competitive car. Who knows? At this point, just based off of last year and last couple of years' performance, I just don't see it. I don't see it from the car perspective, and I don't see it from a strategy perspective either. What are your thoughts?
Like you said, we talked about this before and thought that this would not be a very good move for Lewis. But the more I have thought about it, more I'm thinking that I still don't think it's a great move for him, but I definitely understand and I see his perspective of it. That yes, I think that Lewis has seen the writing on the wall, and he has seen that the 2024 car is not going to be great. And the fact that with the new rule changes coming in 2026, that even if this year's car is crap, they're not going to completely turn everything upside down for 1 year. Unlike last year, where they made huge drastic changes to the car and improved the performance significantly. If the 2024 car proves to be relatively uncompetitive, they're not going to turn everything upside down for 2025 to make the car more competitive, 7-time world champion or not. I have a sneaking suspicion that's the reason why he has exercised his escape clause so early on after signing. I think it's the appeal of winning his 8th champion and besting Michael Schumacher as a Ferrari driver, which is where, 5 of Schumacher's 7 championships came, especially his most recent one, that I think it's more of the allure of maybe trying to win an 8th championship with Ferrari. The thought literally just occurred to me that they may have also told him, or not so subtly straight up told him, but he's kind of seen that the team is starting to focus more on Russell, because Russell is the young gun. He's the up and comer, that they might start favoring Russell a little bit more. And he's decided that, no, if I can get Ferrari to give me equal equipment as Leclerc, then that's where I'm going to go. But that's my thoughts on it. Those 2 dominoes falling in the silly season. We also got the what is probably the least surprising news that we've seen so far this offseason is that McLaren, in an effort after having already given Oscar Piastri a fat contract extension, they have also now given Lando Norris a very nice contract extension that's going to see him stay at McLaren for the next 4 years. So I think this was a no-brainer move. Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. You have to wrap up Norris, because people, now that he has a competitive car, people really can see how great of a driver Norris actually is. If you don't lock this guy up, somebody else will, and they'll do it very quickly.
Absolutely. And he was actually the first one to sign the contract extension. He signed it, 1 or 2 days before Leclerc did. Norris has really been the one that's kind of started setting everything in motion. And now, if Mercedes proves to be more competitive this year than what Lewis is expecting them to be, you're going to have a lot of drivers that are going to be vying to be the next Mercedes driver, partnering with Russell. It's going to get real interesting over the next few months. I think we're going to see a lot more movement in the driver market sooner rather than later.
So on to Stump the Pundit.
Yep.
This time I was thinking about going through some tracks and some of the statistics around that. So let's go through in the history of F1. In the history of F1, what was the most amount of starters for an F1 race?
Oh, I'm going to venture a guess that it was probably sometime in the 70s. And I'm going to say it was probably somewhere around 28 cars.
Not quite. So it was the most amount of starters was 34. It was in 1953, the German Grand Prix.
Really? Yeah, I would have never gotten that one right. So
no, like I said, I mean, I would be super impressed. Now this next one, I'm thinking you probably would know. What was the fewest amount of starters in an F1 race?
That would have been the 2000. Was it 2003 or 2004 at the U.S. Grand Prix at Indianapolis, where they had 6 starters?
Yeah, so you nailed the 6 starters, which I kind of thought, because we talked about this in a previous podcast. It's actually 2005, but you were right on the U.S. Grand Prix. Yeah.
Yes.
There's another couple one. What was the highest top speed so far recorded in F1?
Just read this the other day, and now I cannot. It was the previous generation of cars, not underneath the current power unit regulations. I'm going to say it was somewhere around 2009, 2010, maybe, but I don't remember who recorded that.
We actually have 2. The highest top speed for any race, and then there's a overall highest top speed. So the overall top speed for a race.
Okay, before you say that, then, okay, so now that you've said that, fastest race, the top speed in a race was Keke Rosberg in a Williams. I want to say it was at Silverstone, but I don't think that's right. But I know it was Rosberg in a Williams. But as far as the top trap speed, that one I don't know.
So overall, and for a race, it is held by the same person, which I am a huge fan of. The highest top speed for a race is 372 kilometers per hour, which is roughly 230 miles an hour. That was held at the Mexican Grand Prix in 2016. And then the highest top speed overall is 378 kilometers per hour, and that's roughly 234 miles an hour. That one is also in 2016 by the European Grand Prix, both held by Valtteri Bottas.
Oh, wow. Okay. Very, very interesting. Okay.
That is Stump the Pundit.
Yes, Stump the Pundit. So this week we're going to talk about one of the things that both Corey and I and a lot of people love about Formula One is the fact that the cars are, let's just be honest, cars in Formula One and in open wheel racing in general, you look at them and just beautiful works of art. But there have been a number of cars in the history of Formula One that were just head and shoulders above all the rest. And so this week I went through my memory and did a bunch of historical research, and I came up with a list of the 10 most beautiful cars in the history of Formula One. Starting off at number 10. So the revolutionary Ferrari 640, designed by John Barnard. His first for Ferrari, it sported the first ever electro-hydraulic semi-automatic gearbox and the brilliant Tipo 035/5 3.5 liter V12. The gearbox was revolutionary in the fact that it no longer required the driver to use a clutch to change gears. And through the use of the flappy paddles, which were the paddles situated behind the steering wheel that actuated the up and down gear changes, it allowed the driver to keep both hands on the wheel throughout the gear range. Nigel Mansell drove the car to victory on its maiden outing and earned him the nickname Il Leone from the Tifosi, meaning the lion. The car was plagued by a number of gremlins, but managed to secure 3 wins and 6 additional podiums, but also 18 retirements between Mansell and his teammate Gerhard Berger. This car was just phenomenal. What are your thoughts?
Ferrari even from the very beginning, have been always just a work of art. These cars are just absolutely gorgeous. Not only that, they're just always part of the top of the grid. They're super fast. Love this car, man.
Yes, I do too. Definitely one of my favorites.
Great pick.
Yep. Moving on to number 9. Dan Gurney was a talented racing driver and genius engineer. After starting his F1 career driving for Brabham, Gurney, backed by prominent racers including Carroll Shelby, founded All American Racing. The efforts of AAR produced the beautiful AAR Eagle Mark I, which mimicked the highly successful Lotus 39 but featured a unique beak at the front of the car. Designed by Lynn Terry, the Mark I only won one championship event, but it was still an impressively beautiful car. So this is one of the 60s era pre-aerodynamic cars, and Dan Gurney, who really was a engineering genius, produced just an absolutely phenomenal car. It just exudes class, and it's just a beautiful car. Really, really impressive piece of machinery. Despite its lack of winning pedigree, it was always a very competitive car, just not quite competitive enough.
But it looks pretty.
Yeah, it's an absolutely gorgeous car. Next up on our list is number 8. The March CG 901 was an evolution of the March 881 and 891 designed by Adrian Newey. After a very successful run at designing race-winning cars for March in IndyCar and a brief stint as Mario Andretti's race engineer at Newman Haas in IndyCar, Newey returned to March as the chief designer for the F1 team. The car was noted for its super efficient aerodynamic design and its incredibly tight cockpit that would become a hallmark of Newey's design. So this was the Leighton House March F1 car. This is really the announcement. Even though this car never won any races, it really kind of announced Adrian Newey as a force to be reckoned with in the design of this car. You can even see because of the little fairings on the side of the front of the cockpit where the suspension meets, you can see just how tight that cockpit was. And this has become kind of a hallmark of Adrian Newey's design, as he always produces cars with incredibly narrow noses, so much to the fact that even when he went to later in his career, when he first went to McLaren and started designing for them, the first car that he designed, it was actually so narrow in the nose that Nigel Mansell couldn't even fit into the car initially. Next up on our list is at number 7, before the birth of F1, the striking Alfa Romeo 158/159 was born from the design of Giancarlo Colombo. Through the pre-World War II era and into the first 2 years of Formula One, the car had the distinction of winning 47 of the 54 Grand Prix it's entered. The car, in the hands of Farina, Fangio, and Fagioli, won every race it entered in 1950 and brought the Drivers' Championship to Farina in 1950 and Fangio in 1951. I don't know if you ever saw it, but Ant Anstead did an absolutely brilliant special on for Motor Trend during the pandemic, where he took and he built a replica of this car. It is just such a striking, beautiful car for its design. First launched in, I believe it was 1939. This car raced all the way up until 1953.
Wow.
And was super competitive for that entire time period because the car was just so far ahead of its time. It was just a brilliant piece of machinery, and in the hands of such great drivers such as Farina and Fangio, it was literally head and shoulders above everybody else. Moving on. All right, coming in at number 6, to say the Lotus 79 revolutionized the sport of F1 is an understatement. From the design team of Jeff Aldridge, Martin Rudd, Tony Southgate, Peter Wright, and the genius Colin Chapman came the first car to take full advantage of ground effects aerodynamics, and is often credited for pushing F1 into modern aerodynamics. The car was virtually unbeatable in 1978, and Mario Andretti won the driver's title and Lotus the constructor's title, which would prove to be their last. Now, this is probably one of the most famous Formula One cars in the world. And when you look at it, you can just see all of the attention to detail that went into this car. When you look at the side pods, you can see the skirts that drop down from it, creating that sealing off the edge of the car and creating such tremendous aerodynamic downforce. In 1978, the only time anyone won a race other than Lotus was when both of the Lotuses broke down and failed to finish the race. Between Andretti and his teammate, they just were completely dominant that season. And the only reason why we don't speak about this car in the same breath as other dominant cars like the McLaren MP44 and the Red Bull RB18 is only because as fast as it was also pretty fragile. The next one, coming in at number 5, dubbed the Shark Nose for its striking front end opening, the Ferrari 156 was a striking example of early Ferrari rear engine cars. Designed by Vittorio Giano and Carlo Chitti, the car won the 1961 Constructors' Championship and at the hands of Phil Hill, the Drivers' Championship. The car was designed to comply with F1 switch from 2.5-liter engines to 1.5 liters. As was the policy of Ferrari at the time, the cars were scrapped when they were retired, and the only existing examples are replicas that were built by privateers in years later. So this example right here is one that actually resides at the Ferrari Museum, but it is actually a replica that was built by a privateer, but using plans that were provided by Ferrari. So this was just an incredible example of that era of the cigar tube cars, but it was so distinctive for the shark nose because you can see where it has that little divider underneath the front that takes and directs the air into the radiator inlet. This was just a sleek, sexy piece of machinery. And you can see by the way that the pipes were done at that time in Formula One, most of the cars, the pipes would actually come up and go outside of the bodywork over the top of the rear suspension. Whereas this one, the pipes actually ran underneath the rear suspension.
Was that an advantage to run it that way?
Yes. Yes, it was, because it helped improve with the aerodynamics. At number 4, after moderate success first with BAR and later as a full constructor, Honda Racing decided to withdraw at the end of 2008. Ross Brawn, who was the technical director of Honda Racing, famously purchased the car and the team for £1 and thus was born Brawn GP. The first and only car produced by Brawn was the strikingly beautiful BGP 001. The development of the car was started in early 2008, before the 2008 season even began, under the Honda design team to comply with the 2009 chassis rule changes. Featuring a controversial double diffuser that generated tremendous amounts of downforce, the clean, gleaming white car with few sponsorship stickers and a shoestring budget dominated the F1 season and brought the driver's title to Jenson Button and the constructor's title to Brawn in their first and only outing. The team was purchased by Mercedes at the end of the season, who supplied the engines for 2009 and became the wildly dominant Mercedes Grand Prix. So this is one of those cars that is just so clean looking. Back during the days of before all the cars became adorned with so many aerodynamic little winglets and wings going over the nose and things like that, this one was just such a clean, beautiful piece of machinery. Number 3. Although the MP44 was much more dominant, and we've talked about it quite a bit here on the podcast, in my opinion, the McLaren MP48 was a much more beautiful car. Headed by Neil Oatley, the McLaren design team produced a smooth, efficient design that can only be described as sexy. Although not nearly as successful as its predecessors, partly due to the all-conquering Williams in 1993, the 48 still managed 5 wins and 9 podiums. The car, in the hands of Ayrton Senna, was immensely nimble, but suffered due to the lack of power from the customer Ford V8. And this was the year before McLaren would switch to the much more powerful Peugeot V10. And it was also the last year that Ayrton Senna drove for McLaren before he moved to Williams the following year. So this was the last McLaren that Senna drove in Formula One. Number 2. Speaking of the all-conquering Williams, the Adrian Newey designed FW14B was another shining example of Newey's brilliance. A technological marvel with the addition of active suspension and traction control and the powerful Renault V10 engine. Nigel Mansell took the driver's title with 9 wins and wrapped it up with several races in hand. Mansell and his teammate Riccardo Patrese were often more than 2 seconds faster than the next fastest car on the grid. And this was just one of the most technologically incredible cars in the history of Formula One. They were able to run the car so low to the ground, and this was predating the quote unquote plank era when the cars had to start riding at a certain minimum ride height. Because of the active suspension, Williams was able to run the car at such a incredibly low ride height because the suspension was able to compensate so much better than a traditional spring and damper setup. It literally made the car literally like almost like a ground bound airplane because it was so fast. And in the striking blue and yellow livery, it's just a beautiful car. That's the reason why it's number 2 on my list. It's probably my second favorite Formula One car of all time. And last but not least, coming in at number 1, in 1990, after very successful years in the lower tiers of racing, Eddie Jordan decided to make the jump to Formula One. He tapped noted designer Gary Anderson, who designed the championship-winning F3000 Reynard, to pin his first ever F1 car, and thus the brilliant Jordan 1911 was born. The car was powered by a customer Ford V8. Although the car never managed a podium, it showed excellent form, and Jordan managed to secure 5th in the Drivers' Championship in only its first year in 1991. It also saw the debut of the German wonderkin Michael Schumacher after the regular driver Bertrand Gachot was jailed, but that's a story for another time. So this to me is just the epitome of amazing design in Formula One. Gary Anderson took and had several just absolutely revolutionary design cues for this car. So first off, you'll notice the angled air intake over the rollover hoop above the driver. So this was really revolutionary because what this did is it allowed better air intake into the engine as opposed to most of the other cars at the time, which just had a straight up and down inlet opening for the air box for the engine. And also you'll notice that the shape of the front wing, the way that the nose is able to tuck back a little bit more, but the front wing takes and juts out a little bit more, creating a little more aerodynamic downforce. Drivers who have driven this car say it is just absolutely one of the best Formula One cars ever. This predated just by a couple years the active suspension era. So that's part of the reason why the Jordan was able to be such a competitive car. And in that beautiful green 7-Up livery, this was literally the epitome of Formula One design. And it, to me, is still the most beautiful Formula One car ever produced. All right, then. So that was my top 10 of the most beautiful F1 cars in history. If you agree with me, drop us a comment. Say, hey, good job. If you disagree with me, let us know in the comments as well. Tell me where I'm wrong. We love to hear from you. A couple honorable mentions real quick before we call it a day. Another car that I absolutely love was the Jordan 194 from the 1994 season. It was a evolution of the 191, and it was still just an absolutely beautiful car. Also, the McLaren MP44, the Red Bull RB18, the Lotus 49, and the Lamborghini 291, although highly uncompetitive, was a really, really beautiful car. Corey, what are your thoughts about my list here?
How can you disagree with it? Every single one of them, like you said at the very top, they're just pieces of art.
All right, so shall we bring it home?
I think we're ready, yeah.
And thus concludes another episode of F1 Brake Check. Let us know in the comments your thoughts on our top 10 list, your take on the news, or anything else you want to talk about. We'll be taking off next week while I'm traveling, but we'll return in 10 days' time to discuss the news, including the first car launches of 2024. We'll have a new Stump the Pundit and another history lesson from the archives. You can reach Corey at MCBF1BC, and you can reach me at Scott_D_Vic on X, or you can find us on all the social media channels at F1 Brake Check. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher. Also, help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Breen, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.